We are here today to talk about structured literacy. I'm Julie Ortlieb. I'm a project consultant with the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. My work mostly is in the area of special education and also literacy. And we have Sarah as well. Sarah, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hello, good morning. My name is Sarah Misener. For those of you I don't know, and I'm a project consultant with Julie as well. I wear a couple hats. Literacy is one, but also ELD. So I know I've initially met some of you in that landscape as well. So we look forward to talking about this topic today. I know it's been a hot one out there, so we hope to clear up any confusions today and or expand your thinking around the area of structured literacy.
So we have several ways of engagement for today's learning. One is obviously the chat box. I see some people already saying good morning to us in the chat box. So thank you for already starting that engagement. We will also have an opportunity for a breakout room later in the session. And we have a home-based document that we are working out of today. So anytime that you see this looks like a little notebook or a piece of paper, that's just indicating that there is a link or a resource in that home-based doc for you to check out. So if you see this image in the bottom right-hand corner or somewhere on the screen, there's something for further exploration in the home-based doc.
And we didn't include this in here, but with only 18 of us in this room, we really hope that this is like a dialogue rather than us just talking at you for an hour and a half. So if there's ever a question, ever a comment, ever anything that comes up that you just want to ask or comment upon, please feel free to unmute and just talk. So that's kind of my preferred way of being in these presentations rather than just talking at you the whole time. So we invite you to unmute and participate in that way too.
Thanks, Sarah. I was going to say, I would add the words unmute to the screen too, because we want to hear your voices in the space as well. If you're looking at the home-based document, one thing that might help you is on the left-hand side, it says show document outline, which is a cool feature in Google Docs to show the different agendas and to help you navigate a document. So feel free to enable that so you can click on the different parts of the home-based doc. But in there, you'll see that we do have a PDF of our slide deck, and we have different resources that we will be sharing throughout the session today, as well as breakout room directions, because if you're ever in a breakout room and you're like, hey, what did she say? What did she ask us to do or tell us to do? We wanted to make sure that the directions are in the home-based document for you to access as well. And like I said, we encourage you to open the home-based document that Sarah put in the chat rather than the PDF. The PDF will always be there for you to access later. But when you click on the hyperlinks in the PDF, it doesn't open the links in a new window. With that document that is in the chat box, when you click on a link, it'll open it in a new window so that you don't get lost in the navigation of that doc.
And if for some reason you ever close out of it, it's going to just be right here in the chat. So you can always go back and reopen it.
So here's our agenda for our session today. I'm going to give you a few seconds here to read our learning intentions for today. So whether you work in the literacy realm every day or not, you've probably heard the terms science of reading and structured literacy swirling about. More recently, the science of reading has become a topic that is frequently discussed in the media, and at times an incomplete picture of the science of reading is painted. And with that, some misconceptions and or reduced information has been portrayed. So our goal for today is to unpack what these terms really mean, how they are connected, and how this research can inform our instructional practices. So now that you've seen our agenda for today, what is resonating with you? What do you hope to learn more about in this session? We would ask you please to share your own learning intention in the chat. What do you hope to clarify or come away with in regards to structured literacy and or the science of reading?
Bottom line, why did you click on our session today? Why'd you show up? What were you hoping for?
Amanda, hoping to learn more about the science of reading. Thanks, Amanda. Megan, understanding the difference between this and guided reading, or maybe how your guided reading practices can be enhanced with the instructional practices outlined in structured literacy.
And Megan, I might also encourage, there's my session this afternoon about shifts in small group instruction may help answer some of the nuances of that a little bit more as we talk about text types and different things that we're going to dive into a little bit more in small group, just as a giving you that preview for later as well.
Awesome. Mark, better understanding of structured literacy and science of literacy or science of reading, because you're adopting a new ELA program, or maybe some of you out there are evaluating new programs and want this research at the forefront when you're evaluating resources. Just a stronger understanding overall of science of reading. Awesome. And differentiated approaches for PD. Thank you so much. Better understanding of structured literacy and how to implement. What does that look like? What does it mean for me as a classroom teacher? Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing. We hope that we hit the mark. If there's something that you have questions about as we go along, like Sarah said, feel free to unmute. All right. So Sarah's going to engage us in a Mentimeter to kick us off.
So we are going to do a little bit of maybe myth busting, maybe starting the conversation of what the heck is science of reading. So we have a little Mentimeter that we are going to be doing, and Julie's going to pull that up right now. You are going to be able to engage in it either through typing in the code, clicking on the link within our home base doc, or if you want to use your phone and don't want to like get off of your screen if you're only on one, you can use your cell phone and just scan this QR code that is up there. So we're going to give you a second to, if you want to go through QR code, to grab that. If not, in the home base doc, clicking on the Mentimeter link should get you there. So 11 people. Julie, yours is not showing what I see. 11 people have answered false. There it is. And one person said true. It is actually false. The science of reading is not a program. It is, we're going to learn what it is in a couple of questions. So right now, it isn't something you can purchase. You can't just buy the science of reading and place it in your classroom. There's a lot more to it. So we're gonna try this next question and see if you can get it. So question number 2, we have 13 people ready to join, is going to pop up. The science of reading refers to a vast array of evolving research across many disciplines. True or false? Oh, we have some people throwing true in the chat. We have some people saying true over there in Mentimeter. Okay, and we have a friend saying false. The actual answer is true. The science of reading is a vast array of evolving research that comes from lots of different places. So we're going to show you where all the research, or some of the places that the research is coming from, in just a couple of slides. But it is always evolving. Research is not done as it relates to the science of reading. It is there's new studies coming out. We're learning more about how the brain processes information and how our brain learns. And all of that is informing the science of reading. So we are going to kind of unpack that a little bit more in the next slide. Next question, though, we are going to move on to question 3. So in question 3, it asks us, the science of reading focuses on a single specific component of instruction, such as phonics. True or false? The science of reading focuses on a single specific component of instruction. Got some falses coming through. We got 100% of the people out there say that is false. Yay, that is false. That's one of the things that we see in the media, is that there's a hyper focus on phonics. It's really important, and it's an area that we know in some of our classrooms has not been focused on enough. However, it's not the only thing, right? We know that there's a whole array of skills that our kiddos need to be able to be proficient readers. And the science of reading looks at all of those different areas. So we'll talk about that more as well. And final question for you is, let's see, here we go. The science of reading prescribes how to teach reading. Does the science of reading prescribe how? True or false? This one's taken a little bit more time. True to some. Oh, this one's more of a split. Science of Reading prescribes how to teach reading. Actually, that is false. It informs us on maybe some best practices. We also know that there are some practices that don't have the research behind them, but are we're learning more about. The research is trying to inform us more, but it doesn't prescribe it. So that's something we're going to talk about. And again, that's where the evolution continues to happen with the science of reading. As more research comes out, it helps us inform and continues to build our understanding about what may be the most effective practices. But we also know that kiddos are different, and we need to flex with where our kids are. And some kiddos are going to need certain things, and other kids are going to need other things. So the science of reading isn't lockstep. It isn't something that says, like, you start here and go boop, 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 and you're going to get a proficient reader. We know that we have to have the knowledge in our head to know where we can lean into the research, and also utilize the instructional practices that are based in research to help us really meet the unique needs of our kids. So we'll talk about all of that as we define what structured literacy is. Okay, so Julie is back in our PowerPoint. So this is what the science of reading is not. It's not new. It's not a philosophy. It's not a fad. It's not a pendulum swing. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Like I was just alluding to, it's not a program of instruction. And it's not one single area, right? So those are all things that you may have heard out there as people have talked about the science of reading, as misconceptions have been floating around. This is coming from something that we've put in your home-based doc. This is the Science of Reading, the Defining Guide. So you can access this whole document to kind of look at it a little bit deeper. The science of reading is informed by a lot of different areas of research. So if you progress on to our next slide, the science of reading looks at all sorts of areas, right? It really is just the reading research. It's the research that's out there to inform us. So it looks at cognitive psychology. It looks at developmental psychology. It looks at educational research. It looks at the world of special education. It looks at what we know is best practice as we are meeting the needs of multilingual learners. It's looking at the neuroscience. Those of you that know me, I get so excited when we talk about fMRIs and the activation in the brain as we see proficient readers develop. All of that is pulled together when we're talking about the science of reading. All that is all the research in the field related to reading and learning to read. So that's kind of what we talk about as a whole, is all of those different areas of research. So here's the actual definition that comes from the Science of Reading Defining Guide. We're going to give you a second to look at this because there's a lot on here, but we've kind of already alluded to a lot of these different areas. Notice this is not new. It's 5 decades worth of research that has been out there that is getting pulled together. And there is a lot of evidence out there, right, to inform us, but it's not necessarily telling us exactly how we need to teach reading. It gives us information about how we can teach reading most effectively. But again, that research is continuing to evolve and inform our practice. So we really want to make sure that we're constantly checking back in. What we know today may be different than what we know next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. We're continuing to hone our practice. There are certain areas of the research that are pretty well established, specifically in the word recognition area. We know what it takes because there is a definitive amount of information that has to be known to be a proficient word reader, right? So in word recognition, we know what we need to do. In language comprehension, that our tank is never full in the language comprehension side of things. So we are continually learning about how to best inform students about all of those different areas, the syntactical structures, the word or the morphology, the background knowledge. All of those pieces continue to develop even through adulthood. And so we need to continue to dive into that, and the research needs to continue to inform us on what is going to be the best way to teach our kiddos. But we know that those are areas that have to be explicitly taught. So that is the science of reading. That's how we define it. This definition is the one that we ground ourselves in as we're talking through this presentation. So I just kind of alluded to this whole concept of word recognition and language comprehension. When we talk about word recognition, that's really where we're talking about phonological awareness and phonics and parts of fluency. Word recognition really is that area that we say kids can read the words on the page, yes or no. Language comprehension is that complex part that I was talking about, where it really is, how are the kids able to understand language and really make meaning of that language? So if I read aloud to a kiddo, are they able to understand the story, answer some questions about it? Do they understand the vocabulary? Do they have the background knowledge to access that? Those two pieces are pretty independent of each other, but put together, right, in this multiplication problem, word recognition times language comprehension is what really gets to our reading comprehension, which is where we want skilled readers to be. If we have, and Julie, if you don't mind going to the next slide, if we have this as a math problem, if we have a 0 on either side of that, so if we have a 0 in word recognition, if our kiddos aren't able to tackle the ability to recognize the words on the page, to be able to decode them and to be able to read them, then when we have no skill there, but we have good skill in language comprehension, right? We have a 1 there, fully able to do that. We know in a math problem, the product is still a 0. We're not able to do it. So if they don't have word recognition, we put a piece of text in front of them. Even if I read it out loud to them, they wouldn't be able to say that they are a good skilled reader because they don't have the word rec. Same thing happens. If I have a kiddo that's really good at reading the words on the page, but they are not making meaning of that, then they are not a skilled reader in the end. You can also see that we have kiddos with partial at the 0.5, partial word recognition, partial language comprehension. Their outcome of reading is still not going to be proficient. It's going to be a 0.25. It's going to be compromised. So we can't say we're going to compensate with word rec or we're going to compensate with language comprehension and still say that we have skilled readers as an outcome. We need to work towards full word recognition, full language comprehension to have a skilled reader in the end. So this is just a heuristic that we've leaned in on. This came in 1986. It's been around for a really long time, but it's a great entry point. It doesn't fully encapsulate. It has simplified a really complex process. Word rec, language comp makes a skilled reader. This is one of the heuristics that you will see as people talk about the science of reading, because every bit of research that has come out after this has supported this heuristic. So it's just one that as you're entering in the conversation, especially as you're talking with teachers that may not be working in the K-2 landscape, for them to fully understand that importance of word recognition as they're in 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, this heuristic is great to kind of pull out and say, yeah, even if you're compensating over and over and over again for these areas, it's really essential that we continue to build these skills for our students so that they can be truly proficient in the long run. So, Julie, will you go to 12 for us?
I will. And I just wanted to stop here for a second and just say, like, I've seen this equation many times, but when you actually break it down into the mathematical components of it and really think about it, like it blows my mind when I really think about it that way. And I think, like, just reflecting back on some of the misconceptions about science of reading and structured literacy, and we're going to continue to unpack this, but sometimes there's this misconception that it's only a focus here on word recognition, and it's not. We're going to talk about all the layers of language and how we have to have both of these in the component. They are in the components of the science of reading and structured literacy, and this just shows how important it is to not live in one arena of reading comprehension. And I just wanted to point that out before we moved on, because I think every single time I see this, it just really grounds me in understanding what all children need to be proficient readers. So thank you.
Thanks, Julie. And this is just another representation. So we have the 1986 graphic, right? This is just my version of it in PowerPoint. This word rec times language comp is the same one that we saw in the circles. But then in 2000, the National Reading Panel came out, right? It came out and said, there's these 5 big ideas. Julie, if you don't mind clicking. The National Reading Panel in 2000 said there's these 5 big ideas. There's phonemic awareness, phonics fluency, vocab, and text comprehension. That lines up with what we knew about the simple view of reading. And the National Reading Panel said, hey, there's this research that's telling us that we need to be teaching these 5 big ideas. All of that research is still part of that science of reading, right? It's telling us that we need to make sure that we focus our attention on these big ideas and make sure that we are explicitly teaching them. So we just wanted to call out that this continues to be more and more complex as you go into it. Those of you that know about Scarborough's rope model, we're not really going to be getting into that well, yes, we are. In the next section here, you will see Scarborough's rope is, again, an expansion upon those areas. So you can see at the top, language comprehension. You can see at the bottom, word recognition. Again, all of these areas there's research on them. They continue to grow in what we know, specifically, like I said, in that top portion, that language comprehension side of things. And as they continue to develop and as they continue to, kids become more proficient with them, that's where kiddos move into being more of a skilled reader. So again, we saw a lot of focus in the media around that bottom part, that word recognition side, the phonological awareness, the decoding or phonics, the sight recognition. And I just want to call out sight recognition is really about the orthographic mapping, the phonological awareness and the decoding aspects coming together to 1/20th of a second. Kiddos should be able to recognize a word. And it's not necessarily a sight word, but it's a word that I can read as if by sight. So morphology for me, I can read as if by sight because I've seen it so many times. I've connected the phonology and the phonics over and over and over again. And now that word is in my sight vocabulary. So I just want to call out, it's not just sight words like we think of the fry and the dolch and those types of things, but it's the orthographic mapping, the connection of the phonological and the decoding sides of those skills and those parts of the brain. And then that language comprehension, again, continues to develop, and we need to continue to make sure that we are exploring all of those pieces. So yes, Julie, I think I've talked enough about all of those things. You can tell I enjoy playing with these different models over and over again, but it's time to really for us to look at the next thing, which is why the heck are we talking about this in an MTSS framework? So I'm going to hand that over to Julie.
Thanks, Sarah. Every time I hear you talk about these, I take away new nuggets of information from your passion and your wealth of knowledge. So thank you. So how does this all weave into MTSS? Well, we know that MTSS is a systems approach. We use a data-driven problem-solving approach to maximize growth for all students. We heard that this morning from Dr. Nicole Holland-Sims. And it's this framework for service delivery of evidence-based academic, behavioral, and social emotional practices. And a core tenet of MTSS is ensuring that instruction and intervention are research-based and delivered with fidelity within a continuum of supports. So refining your knowledge of the underpinnings of reading research can help you and other educators to refine instruction and to support the selection of evidence-based approaches so that you can effectively support literacy development within the MTSS framework. So the terms science of reading and structured literacy, as they have been swirling about, we want you to know that they are not synonymous. Science of reading is the accumulated evidence from gold standard research on reading acquisition and instruction. Structured literacy is representative of reading instruction that applies the science of reading to classroom practices. So the science of reading informs structured literacy application. So although it is based on decades of gold standard research and instructional practice, the term structured literacy is fairly new in our reading world. It was coined and trademarked by the International Dyslexia Association. And the intent of establishing this term structured literacy was to differentiate reading instruction or programs that are truly informed by the science of reading from those that claim to be, right? Because now we see science of reading as a hashtag all over the place. And if you go to any website on any literacy product, you're going to see the science of reading somewhere, probably on that website. And so truly understanding the components of structured literacy can help you to better evaluate not only programs, but instructional practices. So like I said, science of reading has somewhat turned into these sound bites wherein only parts of research are highlighted. And unfortunately, the term has been reduced, and sometimes that full comprehensive body of research and evidence is often lost in translation. So we want to bring the focus back to the term structured literacy. It was like we said, IDA, the International Dyslexia Association, coined this term, structured literacy, and it is a pure thing. But it is important that we safeguard this term so it has the power to inform administrators and teachers about effective instruction. We don't want to lose or diminish this word, this application of the science of reading. So that is our intention today, to make sure that you understand what is structured literacy and how it can inform our instructional practices and why it's important.
So really simplistically, science of reading is the research and structured literacy is our instructional practices. Like that is how we can easily differentiate the two as we have these conversations.
And this is a great, that's okay. This is a great article. It's in the home-based doc, Structured Literacy, Applying the Science of Reading in the Classroom. So feel free to check out that resource as well. And we're just going to show a really brief clip here. It's about 30 seconds that will outline structured literacy a little bit more in depth.
As we strive to ensure that all children develop into independent, proficient readers, people ask a very straightforward question. What is the most effective approach to reading instruction? The answer is structured literacy. But what is structured literacy?
Structured literacy is a systematic approach to the teaching of reading and writing. It is based in years of research, and it directly and explicitly teaches students how to work with written language.
This is the IDA, the International Dyslexia Association definition of structured literacy. So I just want to give you a minute to read the definition, take in the graphic on the right, and while you're reading, jot down a few words that pop out for you. You can write them on paper or share them in the chat box. What is standing out to you in this definition of structured literacy? Awesome. I see some things coming up in the chat box. Explicit and systematic. It's about content and methods. Awesome. What else is standing out to you? Look at all the different components in that graphic on the right. Much more than just phonics, right?
And you know what sticks out to me after listening to Nicole earlier today was that this lines up very much with her equity. When she was talking about instruction and equity, she pulled out that explicit instruction. She pulled out those diagnostic aspects so that we can meet the needs of all of our diverse learners and provide them with equitable instruction.
Awesome. So somebody pointed this out in the chat. Notice how the term refers to the what of instruction, the elements or the content, and it also refers to the how of instruction, the teaching principles or methods. So these are two hallmarks of structured literacy instruction, ensuring that we're teaching all the components that evidence has found to be critical elements for reading success, while employing teaching principles that are explicit, systematic, cumulative, diagnostic, and responsive. And if we think back to the components of the simple view of reading, which illustrates that reading comprehension is the product of decoding and language comprehension, the underpinnings of these two critical components are outlined in the elements of structured literacy instruction. And we're going to talk about that in more detail in the next few slides. So since we are here in Pennsylvania, most of us, if not all of us, this is the Pennsylvania Department of Education definition of structured literacy. So I'll give you a minute to read this definition. And while you're reading, think about any additions you would make to their definition or any changes you might make. So while reading or after reading this definition, the PDE definition, is there anything that you would want to add or change to their definition? So just like science of reading is not a program, structured literacy is not a program, but it is an approach to instruction that emphasizes the structure of language. Anything that you would add or change, feel free to throw it in the chat or unmute.
Oh, I got a message saying, where's the goal for comprehension being written in here? And remember that is the outcome, right? We want that outcome. If you go back to the simple view of reading or any of the models that we were looking at, the outcome is for kiddos to be able to comprehend what they are reading on their own and create meaning. So anytime that we are doing any type of activity, whether or not it's in word recognition or in the language comprehension strands, we always want to encourage the kiddos to realize that meaning matters, right? We want to, as we're running into decodable text and we're looking at certain patterns, like if we see the word say cot, C-O-T, because we're working on short O, let's talk about that. What is a cot? Have you ever slept in a cot? Have you ever gone camping and seen a cot? Maybe I'm going to show a picture of it. Where else might a cot be? Could it be in the nurse's room? Could it be? So we can embed meaning because we want kids to realize it's not just about word recognition, right? It's something that in K2, we need to do a lot of focusing in on because that's when they're actually getting that explicit instruction in the word recognition strands, or they're really beginning to, and that's a huge focus. But we also always want to make sure that they realize it's not just about reading the words and doing it quickly. It's also about gaining meaning from that. So always going back and connecting anything that we do to have some type of conversation around meaning is essential.
And for them to have reading comprehension, they need to have linguistic or language comprehension. And those are the components that you're seeing outlined here. So of course, that is going to add to the reading comprehension, having that linguistic or language comprehension. So now you have two different definitions to work off of. And hopefully the further information that we will provide will help you to solidify your understanding even further. So this is, again, a short clip on structured literacy and the components.
What do we teach when we adopt a structured literacy approach?
The components of structured literacy are many. We begin by teaching students about sounds, how the sounds work within words to combine to convey meaning. We move from sounds, phonemes, to the teaching of the letter or letters that can be mapped onto those sounds, sound symbol correspondence. For example, think about the sound k. What letter or letters can be used C, K, but also CK. So we have to be thinking about the patterns that are represented within our English language. We can move from sound symbol correspondence then to the teaching of syllable types. Think a bit about why we teach our children short vowels. Wow, we find those in the most common syllable type, a closed syllable. That pattern, the consonant following the vowel, is a clue to the vowel sound. I think that it's important to remember that when we teach sound symbol correspondence, phoneme grapheme correspondence, and syllable types, we're teaching that not only for the reading of words, but also for the spelling of words. We also have to be cognizant of the morphemes that we find within words. Morphemes, of course, are meaning units. We immediately ask our students to read base words, and then we add endings, inflectional endings like ed, s, ing. And then we move to more advanced morphemes. We do this not only for the reading of words, but also to unlock the meaning of words.
As we just heard, when adopting a structured literacy approach, we explicitly teach children the sound structure of language. We also teach the children letter knowledge, the names of the letters, their formations, and the sounds that correspond to each of the letters. Children are taught the different types of syllables to help them learn what sounds the vowels in a word will make. We directly teach spelling, and we teach children about the meaning units within words, morphemes. We also must ensure that children are provided with instruction to aid them in comprehending both oral and written language. It is not enough just to teach children the word structure of a language. We also directly teach them about text structure and how to understand the meanings of a text.
It's important for our students to not only be able to read words, but to make meaning. And so, as a part of structured literacy, we address the meaning of words, vocabulary. We talk with our students about sentences and how sentences are constructed, both for reading and for writing. We also think about the overall meaning of paragraphs, the text itself. So structured literacy really encompasses all of the elements that are necessary for a student to become a proficient reader.
When we adopt a structured literacy approach, we teach children language. We teach word structure to support reading, spelling, and the meanings of words. We also teach the structure of text and how to understand both oral and written language.
All right, so just a quick pause point here after that video. In the chat box, or if you want to unmute, I want you to just tell us a component of structured literacy. What stuck out to you in that video, and what is a key component of structured literacy instructional practices? Carrie says sounds, parts of words, and meaning. Thank you, Carrie. Vocabulary development. It's needed more at the middle school level. Thank you, Jamie. Notice how she called out those elements of comprehension that maybe were missing in the other definition.
Yeah, I got a message about morphemes and really focusing on all those affixes, prefixes, suffixes, all of those pieces. Latin, Greek, all of the different roots.
Many learners in the middle level that struggle with decoding.
Yes.
And
Megan.
why is that? Why is that, Megan? Is it because in the elementary there wasn't a strong foundation, or is it because we're not teaching those word parts, those morphemes, the layers of language that we're going to talk about in the middle level? Is that somewhere where we could enhance our instructional practices? Because sometimes our kiddos get older and we think they don't need that, right? And that's a lot of times we say it's a K-2 focus. That's where we focus on phonics and decoding. But how can we bring more of this word study, this vocabulary to the forefront for our older students as well?
And we often, like Julie said, we focus on K2 being where we really do the phonics practice. But if we think about advanced phonics or advanced word study, it's really third, fourth, and above that we start really looking at multisyllabic words. And if kiddos don't have a way to fall back on some of those foundational knowledge aspects, such as a syllable type, how are they tackling reading those multisyllabic words? The syllable types are great when they're, in K2 and working through it, but they're really very helpful when they get into those more complex multisyllabic words, and they have to sit there and figure out how to take that apart and figure out the sounds that those different vowels make within each of those syllables. So those foundational skills are not just essential in the K2 realm, but how they carry forward and how the teachers connect them throughout the grade levels is really important. And do your upper grade teachers even know how to prompt kids to take apart those multisyllabic words so that they can read them effectively? And that's another piece that as we do work, it's getting uncovered that the secondary teachers may not have that knowledge to be able to help the kiddos really figure out how to read those more complex science terms, social studies concept terms, all of those different vocabulary that are cropping up as they get older are really challenging to read if you don't have those skills to take them apart and get to the components. Yeah, Jamie, absolutely. Our multilingual learners, we have kiddos coming in, right, that don't have any knowledge of an alphabetic system, right? They may be coming from Chinese, which is a symbolic language, right? They have a symbol that means it's logographic. They have a symbol that has a meaning, right? They don't have to sit there and figure out letters and sounds and figuring out how the phonemes and the letters connect, right? Sound symbol, not a concept that they've ever considered before. And now they're coming in and having to learn an alphabetic system. And so that's definitely something that systems have to consider. How is that being taught in the middle school? It still needs to be, as we see on the screen next to Nancy Hennessy right now, it still needs to be taught explicitly and systematically and cumulatively, which we'll get to as we look at those, the methods that we use to teach structured literacy. So absolutely. Yeah, and vocabulary as well. Yeah, how are we making sure that we're exposing all students to essential vocabulary, and having them own those words is so essential. And how do we promote that across all content areas? Because it's not just the ELA teacher's responsibility to be the holder of the vocabulary. How do we bridge that across all of our content areas? Wonderful.
Good discussion in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, is there anything that we missed, Julie? I didn't see anything else.
Just the piece about instructional minutes, right? There's certain parts that feel neglected because of all that we have to fit into our schedules. Absolutely. And the thing that we talk about is like that shift, right? In the K2 realm, the main goal is to get kiddos to be reading. Like I said, we never leave meaning behind, but we really need kiddos to be learning those foundational skills so that as we start shifting into 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, they have those foundational knowledge in how to take words apart. And then they can start really putting a lot more time and attention into text structures and into the, taking apart those complex sentences and making meaning of them. But we need to make sure that in K2, they have that foundation so that they can, you don't have to take a ton of instructional time to reteach that. You can dip into it when they need it, but you don't have to spend that time teaching all of those basics that should have come in the K2 classroom. Absolutely. And so that really talks about that, that cumulative aspect. How is that being articulated from K-12, and how do teachers have the knowledge of what it was taught prior to and what students need moving forward and out of their classrooms? Yes. Sandy said need ongoing PD. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Right, for that co-articulation across the system, for sure.
And I think that's something that if you have an MTSS framework or you're considering an MTS framework, that is a key component of MTSS, is that ongoing PD and coaching and data meetings and making sure that we're looking at the students as a whole, and also taking that data and finding the root cause and being able to drill down and narrow our instructional targets for our students. That's all part of an MTS framework, and this all layers together the structured literacy and how are we making sure that we're choosing evidence research-based practices within an MTSS framework so that we're supporting the literacy development of all students in our schools.
We're going to look at some of that terminology a little bit more closely. So you can see that center graphic, the center part of the graphic that International Dyslexia Association created, really focuses on the content and elements of instruction. So you'll see that they pull out phonology and sound symbol correspondence. So that's like, phonological awareness when we're doing just sounds. That's where we live in the phonology realm, right? As soon as we introduce letters, we're moving into that sound symbol correspondence. And in that sound symbol correspondence, we often refer to it as phonics instruction. But then we also have syllable instruction called out, those syllable types, understanding the 6 syllables. So closed syllables, and I'm going to use clover because otherwise I forget all of my 6 in order. But closed syllables, LE syllables, open syllables, vowel consonant E syllables, and then our controlled vowels. Did I get all of them? I'm in my head trying to do that.
I've never heard clover before, so that's super helpful.
Yeah, clover. I can
Awesome.
throw a little link in there. If you look, syllable types clover, it helps you just remember the syllable types that are there. So all of those syllables, like we said, you start really starting to teach that in 1st grade, building up knowledge as they move through and get into 2nd grade, so that then when they get into the older grades, they can lean back on that to figure out those multisyllabic words that they're running into. And it gives them a way to break it apart and figure out what each of those syllables are in isolation so that they can blend them back together to figure out these really long, complex words that they're going to be running into. And when we look at sound symbol correspondence and syllables, when we look at the PDE definition, they called out orthography. Those aspects go into the orthography. Morphology also sometimes plays into the orthography of our language, because our language is what's called morphophonemic. We use both morphemes and sounds to spell and to create our written system. So all of those layers kind of fall into the orthography that PDE used in their definition. Morphology is just like, it's the morphemes. It's the smallest meaningful parts of words. So in kindergarten, you're actually starting to teach morphology when you introduce the suffix S. S means more than one, right? We have a cat, we have cats, means now I have more than one cat. So morphology, it's never too young to start thinking about that and start putting in meaning to suffixes and prefixes. The syntax and semantics are then also used when we talk about discourse, right? So when we're looking at those areas, we're really talking about how our language is formed in terms of word order and the complexity of our language. Really, if we need to be able to pull apart complex sentences, we need to lean on that syntax and semantics to be able to make meaning. So those are areas that we need to make sure. Are we teaching grammar? Do kiddos understand how to utilize the structure of our language to create sentences, but to also dissect them to be able to make meaning? And so all of that goes into the discourse, both into oral discourse, but also into the written text discourse. And those 2 areas, again, orthography and discourse, were pulled out in our PDE definition of structured literacy. So you'll see that there's some discrepancy on how they called it out between IDEA and PDE, but it really is all about the same areas. It's just the layers of language and how they've organized those layers of language. So what we are going to ask you to do is we're going to have you do a little activity of exploring the elements of structured literacy. So you guys are going to go into breakout rooms, and Julie's going to be setting them up. And you're going to have 2 different rounds. In round 1, we are going to ask you, utilizing a link within your home-based docs. It's called Structured Literacy, Effective Instruction for Students with Dyslexia and Related Reading. So if you click on that link, you're going to get all of the resources that you need to be able to do this. In round 1, what you're going to do is you're going to read about your element. If you get put in room 1, you're going to be talking about phonology. If you get put in room 3, you're going to be talking about syllables. We want you in your room to define the term. What is a syllable? What is a syllable type? So these are not like auditory syllables, like not the ones that we're clapping out, but they're written syllables. What might this look like in the classroom? How might I use that? I've already alluded a lot to number 3. And then how does current instruction align to this instructional element? So is it even being taught? Some of our systems, we know some of these elements may not be taught explicitly right now. Maybe it gets referenced, maybe it's mentioned in passing, but it's not necessarily taken and taught directly. So have that conversation. And I know many of you are at a systems level and not in a classroom level. Think about from the system level, is there consistency across all over the classrooms? Is there a consistent expectation for instruction? Or is it kind of based on the teacher, based on their knowledge, how they choose to address that specific element? So we're going to, Julie, are you okay with those breakout rooms?
I am. So I'm going to create 6 breakout rooms because there are 6 topics. And just so you know, everything is in the home-based doc for your instructions. So here is the document that you're going to be accessing. And then here is your instructions for that breakout room in the home doc. Okay.
So the next piece that Julie's going to dive into really is going to be around the teaching principles, which are the outside part of this circle on the IDA graphic, around systematic and cumulative, explicit and diagnostic instruction. So we are not going to continue to watch the video that we started watching earlier just because of time. But if you want to see Nancy Hennessy, who was the lady in that video, go on and explain all of these elements. There's about 5 more minutes of that video that you could listen to her, but Julie's going to take it away and do a little explanation of those 3 different areas.
So that's the video, it's embedded in the presentation. Feel free to watch that a little bit later. So as we talked about earlier, that structured literacy is about the content and also about the methods. And structured literacy instruction uses evidence-based principles for instruction. So we throw these terms around a lot: explicit, systematic, and cumulative, diagnostic, and responsive. So systematic and cumulative refers to the instructional order of the concepts and the strategies for introducing new concepts. So we start with easier concepts first, move to more advanced concepts, and then cumulative means that as each new concept is introduced, it's practiced in conjunction with concepts that have been previously learned. So systematic and cumulative instruction logically builds on what students have already learned and focuses on the most useful concepts and skills first, so that they can immediately put their knowledge into application. Explicit instruction means there's direct student-teacher interaction, where the teacher is providing clear instruction and making sure that we give information in a palatable manner. And we're not expecting students to discover information on their own. Students are not expected to infer through exposure or incidental learning. And explicit instruction is what levels the playing field so that all students are given equal access to the concepts and skills that they need to succeed. Diagnostic and responsive consists of that ongoing assessment, whether it be formal or informal, so that we're assessing student needs and progress. And then we're being responsive when we use the data to adjust and or enhance our instructional methods. And then a final element of structured literacy instruction is that it's hands-on, it's engaging, it's multisensory, multimodal, so that we're making sure that we're engaging students in all aspects of instruction. And I want you to mark which one of these terms is most closely assigned to the principal. So when I give you a scenario, what does it make you think of? Does it make you think that instructional practice is systematic and cumulative? Does it make you think of explicit instruction, or does it make you think of diagnostic and responsive instruction? Here's the first scenario. During a whole group lesson, the teacher begins the lesson by reviewing previously learned sounds and by reading familiar CVC words before moving into a new lesson. Awesome. And if you can't get the stamp feature to work, feel free to throw that in the chat as well. Awesome. I see so many people in systematic and cumulative. That's amazing. And this is not a perfect science. If you say one of the other ones, most likely it's applicable as well, because a lot of these interlay and interweave one another. But yes, we're making sure that we're building on skills previously learned. Awesome. So I'm going to clear off our drawings and we're going to do another one. So after that, the teacher then introduces a new digraph, having students echo the letter keyword sound. The teacher shows a CVC word with a digraph and demonstrates how to segment and blend sounds in the CVC words containing digraphs and provides opportunities to practice new words with digraphs. So in this one, she's introducing the new digraph and modeling, and then giving them practice opportunities. Awesome. Explicit. I see so many of you stamping explicit. Excellent. It is a very explicit approach to instruction. The students are not expected to just know what a diagraph is. She's explicitly teaching it. All right, we'll do one more because I want to honor the time that we have left. So now, based on the formative assessment collected during whole group, the teacher plans skill groups for small groups of students who need more practice with specific skills. Some students are struggling with those diagraphs, so she might plan a small group instruction around teaching diagraphs and applying it to maybe a decodable text. So listen to that first part again. Based on formative assessment collected during the whole group, the teacher plans skill groups for small groups of students who need practice with specific skills. I see a lot of you stamping in diagnostic. Yeah, so we're collecting data. We're being responsive to student needs and planning further instruction for our students.
Okay, so we have included in your home-based doc an article by Louise Spear-Swerling. And she goes through and really explains structured literacy practices versus typical literacy practices. And we're not going to have time to do it at this moment, but what we encourage you to do, or for you to lead teachers through, if you're trying to shift to a structured literacy framework, is thinking about where instruction currently aligns to these structured literacy practices, and then maybe looking through and saying, where is the instruction falling more towards the typical literacy practices, and what shifts can be made to enhance the instruction to align more closely into the structured literacy practices. So there's a lot of great practices that people are doing already that fall right under the structured literacy practices. Like, many of these things are not new, but sometimes there's some things that are interspersed that we've now learned more about in terms of instructional practices that we want to start gravitating away from and more towards that more explicit, more systematic, more cumulative, and more diagnostic instruction. So this is a great place to kind of revisit and look at and think about. The article in itself is wonderful, but this is a great little table embedded within it that can really lead to a lot of conversations within your classroom or within your systems. So we're going to leave you with that, but we would like to hear from you after today's session. What might you walk away with and do? What are your next steps? So you can share on social media if that's your place for sharing, or you can just share in the chat, or you can unmute. You can do whatever feels the most comfortable to you. But what are you thinking about walking out of the session today?
As well.